The House of Commons has risen for the summer break with a possible return to ratify the new NAFTA legislation. JP is here to give us a rundown. Yeah. So what made the cut? What ended up getting passed?
Well, MPs managed to pass dozens of bills at a breakneck pace over the last month, passing a dozen bills at least by my count. Some major consequential legislation, including the budget, pot pardons bill, so people who have a simple possession record for marijuana, they'll be able to get that record suspended. There's also legislation to change animal cruelty laws, which is really important, including getting rid of shark fin imports, banning the captivity of dolphins and whales and all that sort of thing, a major overhaul of the fisheries regime, a bill to help people who have disabilities, and of course some of the NAFTA enabling legislation, not the actual enabling legislation, but some of the changes to the tax code that are required to bring in the NAFTA bill if they do so later in this summer. So very substantial stuff. We should say in total the government looks to have passed about 84 bills in this parliament since they were first elected in 2015. 74 bills have passed or are awaiting royal assent. 10 more are coming in the days ahead after the Senate is expected to rise tomorrow. Let's compare that to how many the previous Conservative government did under Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He did 122 government bills in the 5 years of his majority government, so quite a few less for the Liberals. This time they blame the Senate, saying that the newly independent Senate has slowed things down a lot.
They set that Senate up.
Yeah, which is funny. Yeah, maybe regretting that campaign promise last time. But it has slowed things down considerably because so many more senators, so many independent senators are moving amendments to government legislation, which does make it harder to pass bills quickly.
Okay, what about the converse? What died?
Yes, as I mentioned, a lot of government bills have passed, but private members' bills, that's legislation introduced by individual parliamentarians, a lot of those are slated to die, including Rona Ambrose's bill, which would bring about sexual assault training for judges. That is likely dead. Also, a bill that would implement the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in this country. That's a private member's bill from NDP MP Robin Saginaw. She was really pushing for that one with the government's support. That will likely die because of Conservative opposition and fears that by passing that bill, it will give vetoes to Indigenous peoples to stand against natural resources projects in this country. Scholars are split on that, but it didn't matter, didn't get through the Senate despite having been passed by the House of Commons more than 2 years ago. So a lot of private members' bills are dying on the order paper. There's likely no chance of them surviving, even if the House comes back in the summer, because if it does, which they're expected to do, if the U.S. moves on NAFTA, they'll be really focused on implementing Bill C-100, that enabling legislation that will put in place NAFTA in this country, and they'll be focused on that alone.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Andrew, what do you make of the conundrum with the Senate? I mean, a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me have written extensively about whether or not this independent experiment, or whatever you want to call it, has worked. What do you think, based on what we just heard?
Look, I don't understand why we have a Senate. I just cannot fathom why we continue to have this Senate, other than the fact, obviously, there's no constitutional mechanism to get rid of them. The fact that they are now starting to exercise more power, I think, is worrisome from a democratic standpoint. They are not elected. They've been appointed by a particular set of prime ministers as they've gone along. They have no accountability to the provinces. I couldn't tell you more than a handful of who's actually in there. So it is problematic. If they are doing thorough review, that can be good. Certainly they've tried, I think, in some cases to be quite thoughtful. But by failing to implement an agenda that has been approved by the House of Commons, it's really worrisome.
What about the converse view, David? I mean, taking a bill like Bill C-69, where there was a lot of people who were upset from, and not just people in Alberta, but other people in other provinces who were upset about the initial sort of the way the bill looked originally. The Senate listened. They did extensive sort of tours and held committee hearings, and they ended up making a lot of amendments which were adopted by the government. Does that show that the Senate is working, or is it still kind of more of a liability?
No, not really, because the amendments that were adopted, there were over 200 amendments for C-69, and the government only accepted maybe less than 100 of them, and the main amendments that were proposed by the more conservative senators weren't even considered. I think what's going on here with the Senate, I mean, it's the same debate all the time. I mean, if you need to reopen the Constitution to change this, and if you reopen the Constitution, you have Quebec, you have First Nations, you have everything, and you can't get anything done. Nobody really understands the Senate. Like Andrew said, nobody can really name a senator. We hear more and we know more about the U.S. Senate than a Canadian Senate. I think the key here for the Liberals is still the ballot question being the environment. They want to be able to say that they passed key bills regarding the environment. They want to stay focused on that and go into the election cycle saying, okay, if you vote for the Conservatives or a vote for the NDP or a vote for the Greens or a vote for the Bloc Québécois, you're allowing the Conservative to go ahead and wreck the environment. So the only party that can do a good job on climate change is us, and this is why this C69, C48 on the tanker ban, these are all these bills that are trying to establish that ballot question for the Liberals.
Melissa, what do you think?
I think that the Senate can often be used as something very convenient for politicians. I know John Paul mentioned UNDRIP. If the government was actually serious about this legislation, they would have passed it in their 4-year term as they campaigned on it in 2015. But instead, they say, look at those big bad Conservatives in the Senate. They're not passing this. So it's always a tool. And frankly, I think it's one that governments will continue to hide behind when they don't want to do what they said they were going to do.
Marika?
Yeah, I think that Melissa has hit the nail on the head. It's also, UNDRIP is not something that is going to really sway a lot of votes in the key areas that they need to. So it's, I think, a safe move for them. On the question of the Senate, I think that on C69, you saw the Senate bring forward a lot of amendments and you saw the government accept many of them. So I don't think it's fair to say that, and nobody said this, but it's certainly not a useless institution. I think there are absolutely accountability questions, and I think that it's just a bit of a convenient, upper chamber to blame once in a while for the government. But certainly they are also causing other challenges.
Yeah, and I would say on C69, many observers agree that the Senate actually improved that legislation. There was 188 amendments, and they accepted 99, just to put that number on the record. And a lot of them were really welcomed by industry, by the province. Jason Kenney was, kissing Paula Simons on the day that the legislation was accepted by the government because she had pushed so strongly for changes that he was advocating for. They wanted more, but he also got some things that he really wanted, strengthening the role of the provinces in the review process, limiting the ability of the environment minister to step in and start and stop timelines for environmental reviews of major natural resources projects, giving more authority to the regulatory agency, taking it out of the hands of the minister and the prime minister's office. These are things that came about because of some of the newly independent senators who are really pushing for changes. So I think they're useless. It's not.
I also think it's
Okay, Andrew, go for it, and then I'll get it.
But they thwarted the will of a democratically elected government, and whether we like what the government was doing or not, that's simply not their job. And it's not
They've passed every government bill. They've passed every
but
single government bill, so they're not thwarting necessarily the will of the government. They're just not letting private members' legislation get through the place.
as approved by the House of Commons.
Right, but that's
well, I'm sorry, the House of Commons actually has a democratic mandate to approve this stuff. The Senate does not have any mandate to thwart this type of legislation.
There's a bigger issue
They have a
here.
constitutional mandate, I would say. But
well,
there's
that's
actually
fine,
a
but that's
bigger
not a
issue here where
democratic
it's
mandate.
very
Hold on,
very
let's go,
difficult. So it's very difficult to explain to the outside world, investors in this country, that we have the Senate that could potentially hold up legislation. It could potentially not. It could never see the light of day, and that's really, really hard for investor confidence in Canada. So there has to be a streamlined process, and it has to be better than the one that we have now.
I agree.
David, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, the Senate, in Quebec, we did away with that upper chamber in the 60s. I mean, so this is something that has there's no representation here. There's, again, well, yeah, we went down that road and that didn't seem to work either. And there's just, we need more representative democracy, not delegated democracy like this.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the Power Panel. David Ortel, Melissa Lantzman, Andrew Thompson, Marika Walsh, and John Paul Tasker. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.